Hello, and welcome back to another video episode, but very specifically, another Take Me to Church episode of the Unfounded Podcast. I want to thank you for being here with me on this beautiful Sunday. I am coming to you again on Sunday. I tried actually to record this episode yesterday, but I had a bunch of technical difficulties trying to figure out the video part, and unfortunately, I got over 2 hours worth of content recorded and ended up not being able to use any of it because the audio, some technical issues is what I'll leave it at without getting into too much detail. So unfortunately, that one is lost to the ages. A lot of very interesting topics that I got into, but I figured that there was a reason why that happened. There always is. And to start the podcast, I'll just say one of the things I've noticed is that I'm figuring out a lot of issues as that happened, right? So this is a message coming through to start today, much different than would have been yesterday, is sometimes when you're working really hard on something, you can find yourself getting lost in kind of what's going wrong. And I've found myself doing this for years, and I'm not exaggerating, years in the context of making this kind of content. While some of you may laugh at the thought of struggling for that long learning something like OBS and learning something like Ableton or any music production or video production software, DaVinci, to me, at least, they've been extremely complicated. Some of the hardest things to learn that I've ever attempted, and I've attempted quite a few different things in my academic career, I guess we could call it. So it's really thrown me for a loop, and for a majority of that time that I've been learning, I've been hitting walls, having little issues and one issue leading to another and never being able to really fix them, which is why you as a viewer, if you've been following me for a while, have seen sporadic content, changing types of content, or me, like the previous 7 episodes of Take Me to Church, only doing an audio version. When in reality, the video version is not that much different for most episodes. It's just me looking at a camera instead of me staring down at the screen like that. So it's really different, and pressing record on another program. But I also had to iron out all of the settings, get everything working with my setup, get my setup working properly, learn how to record audio, analog audio, and then learn how to, properly get all of the digital versions of the software to work properly together. And it's just taken me forever. And it's been so frustrating that most of the time as I hit a wall, I just kind of get frustrated immediately in the process. Really frustrated. Like it would ruin my day, kind of frustrated. And I'd waste hours, days, on one specific issue, going in circles that lead to nowhere. And I remember in the middle of that, I felt like there was it felt like it was being done to me for some specific reason. And I've started to put together what that reason is recently. And I think, I was talking about this the other day, actually, that it's something like, if you want to teach yourself something, if you want to really learn something for yourself, the process inevitably involves failure. You're going to continually bounce against walls. Why? Because that's how you learn the thing. Because there's nobody there teaching it to you, right? There's nobody telling you, hey, this is the path to take. The reason teachers can be valuable is because they will scaffold what you're learning so that you don't have to make those wrong turns. To learn, don't make that wrong turn to get back on the right path. But somebody way back when had to do that for you and me, right? In every context, regardless of the subject area, right? They had to take a wrong turn and learn why the path was there in that specific context, why they had to get back on it, right? Or they had to reclaim the truth, right? Their own life. And so it's inevitable that you're going to have, with whatever your project is, it doesn't have to be in my context, but whatever you're working on, whatever you're striving for, especially if it's something that you are doing by yourself, for yourself, which if it's really something you want to do, it's most likely, at least in the beginning, gonna be just you. You have to be your own teacher. You have to be the one that encourages yourself as you're going through those things. And I haven't done a good job of that for most of this time. I've actually been really hard on myself, I think, retrospectively. Whereas right before I started this podcast, I kind of started a new tradition I think I'm going to continue in every new episode I make, where I kind of just made myself a little 30-second pep session kind of locker room talk to get me hyped up for the game, but in a weird way, like talking to my future self. And that was really constructive, you know? I'm excited to listen back to it as I edit all of this, right? Because it was me giving a shit about myself, right? Which is different than what I used to do. Me from a year ago or 2 years ago, if I would have just had the day I had yesterday and lost hours worth of work, you know, a whole day's worth of work, really. And work that's very intuitive, as you know, stuff that I don't plan out, so it's hard to recreate. There's a feeling of loss that you get with that would always threw me upside down to where I couldn't regain the day. I couldn't enjoy anything else. I would ignore other people that are around me if they're around me, or even my dog, right? Just because I tended to do that, as I would get upset. One of my trauma responses was to kind of isolate. And so I've recognized through even the beginning of this podcast recently, but over the last couple months probably to be more accurate, that I'm not doing that anymore. And that the universe is giving me opportunities to kind of bring it full circle, right? So that what happened yesterday wasn't a loss. As a matter of fact, there was a lot that came out of that episode that really clarified some things for me conceptually, so that today, as we go into chapters 14 and 15 of Genesis, I think I'm a little bit better prepared. And as I say that, I also have a much better product for you. The audio quality, the video quality is going to be much better than it would have been if yesterday's went forward, right? So I hope that's not too much in the weeds for you to start this podcast off, because I know this is a Take Me to Church episode, but that's what I was called to speak about this morning, because it feels like if you're listening to this, there is some context in which that's relevant to you, that there's some context in which you're being too hard on yourself. And even if you're not being too hard on yourself, you are in a space where whatever you want to be, whatever you want to do, there isn't a lot of support for that, right? External support. So that you have to be that support all the way up until there is external support. You're the one that kind of brings it into being. And before we get started here, I want to kind of bring one part of the podcast that we lost yesterday forward so that it is retained in this episode. And it was this idea that popped in at a certain point. Very random, but it was an intuitive message. And this is what kind of lets me know here in the moment as we're doing this episode as well, that these things, I don't have to worry. Something's reassuring me right now that everything is going to work out in the end, that even if I do something intuitively here where I don't plan it, right? There's no structure to it. That when I'm saying that something else is speaking, that is real. And I hope you know that I believe that's real at the very least. Because it comes back. It reminds me, just like it says it will, whatever it is, right? I like to think of them as angels, right? Or even ancestors, right? People that are close to you, that love you, care for you. That they're trying to reassure me that they are real in that very subtle way, right? I'm here again, and here's that subject that you thought you were going to lose forever yesterday, right? So, that being said, the subject that I thought I was going to lose forever, real quick, I need a drink of water because my mouth's a little dry. So a couple things before we move on, because I have a couple of things I want to bring forward from last week's episode, or yesterday's episode, that I kind of got lost. First is, this is cool. This is just one of my little coasters, but it's a little like NES cartridge. I thought I'd show it to you because it fell off, and it reminded me as I looked at it of something that I'm really trying hard to do consciously, especially over the last year, is to kind of honor my inner child, and if I see something that sparks interest as I'm going through the world, to not just play it off as something that's silly, to really see, hey, what is it about that thing that sparks my interest? I've always loved video games, and video games were a big part of my life as I was a kid, because I was kind of home alone as I was younger and growing up, because I was an only child, right? And so I had video game consoles and movies that kind of kept me company in those times, and video games specifically, because they're a little deeper integration, really gave me something. And so I like to bring that forward as well, in the way I'm bringing what was lost in yesterday's episode forward. All of us need to kind of reach back into our childhood years and see what was important to us as a child, because there's a reason it was important to us, right? And even if it isn't something that's practically useful, it will become practically useful in your life when you incorporate that thing back into your life, because it will make you a more whole version of who you are, right? So, that being said, also, another funny thing that happened yesterday is I was, one of the reasons that the episode didn't work out too well is I have this pad here on my mixer that when I cough or something like that, it's like a cough button like you see in a lot of the shows, except I have to reach over and push it, right? I don't have like a button under the desk or anything. And so I was using that yesterday to kind of take drinks and things like that. And I even mentioned, kind of foreshadowing, a premonition of sorts, that I hope that I never accidentally leave the pad button on and then continue to do the podcast for a period of time, and then proceeded to, in like the next 5 minutes, do that for like a 10-minute section of the podcast, maybe not that long, but it was a decent section of the podcast. And then just had to kind of laugh at myself, because this was in the second attempt. This was after everything had already stopped working and I had to start re-recording. So I was going to have to edit this all together. And so I just had to kind of laugh at myself. And so that did kind of bring that was part of the way I was able to get through yesterday as a hard day, in kind of contrast to what I used to do, is I would focus on the negative thing and just get drawn into the problem, so much so that I would get drained energetically, and then I would go in circles. I wouldn't get anything done. Whereas yesterday, what I started to do is, as I started to have problems, I started to recognize that maybe there's a point to it, and let's just take our time and enjoy the process, right? And so laughing at things as simple as that, as laughing at what's going on. There's a little bit of pressure when you're creating content. You're in front of a camera and stuff, and you really want it to go well. If you put all this time and energy into something, you want to be able to at least view it yourself and enjoy it. When that doesn't happen, it's not fun. And so you have to go through the process of feeling that pain or that frustration, whatever emotion you feel in the moment, but not have that negative reaction, see what the purpose of it is. And if you can do that properly, you'll actually realize that the day was good. You know what I mean? That's what I realized yesterday. At the end of yesterday, I was like, yesterday was a really good day, because like there was some fundamental issues that I have been tinkering with, wasted days and days and days searching the internet, tinkering with my computer, restarting it, taking it apart, replugging things in, tracking everything I can with to no avail. And somehow yesterday, through all of this that I was just explaining, I fixed it. But it took me kind of seeing what the purpose of it was. And it just, boom, right there. I found the solution very quickly myself without even really looking too hard. Didn't have to really have much help. So there's something in that to start the podcast, right? But to get back to the point that I wanted to bring forward from yesterday's lost episode was this idea of substrates. There was this talking about something, I can't remember exactly specifically what, but the idea that the world itself, matter, the physical world, the hard stuff, right? Everything that you see, everything you're made out of, right? There's an idea that that some parts of this, some things in this matter-based world can be either inherently good or inherently evil, right? And something I wanted to say very adamantly yesterday that that's not the case. And I was pointing it out, and it kind of struck me because it was a new concept that I haven't really thought of before, but at least to very much depth. But it brought up the comparison of a computer, like what I'm using this to make this content on. Like silicon, right? That the material world, everything we see, that we feel, that's the substrate, it's the silicon. The board the computer is kind of printed on is what it's made out of, right? But the spirit, the soul, what actually is watching this right now, what's looking at you right now, that's not silicon. You could define it as maybe carbon atoms aligned in a certain structure. But the thing you see in my eyes looking back at you, right, that you can feel, that's the soul. That's the electricity running through it. It's the charge running through it, right? And the reason you have positive and negative connotation to spirit, to soul, right? The idea of angels and demons, for instance, right? Good or bad ghosts, you could say in more of a secular context, is because it's talking about charge. It's energy. Electricity is how we refer to it in the secular world, modern day, right? But the spiritual world it's referred to as energy, as a certain type of thing. It's not matter necessarily, right? It's a certain part of source, right? It has its own characteristic that's separate and apart from the matter-based world, which is why it is contained inside of a body, why the spirit's contained inside of a body, why the electrons run through the motherboard, right? It's a different things that have a certain symbiosis when used together or when placed together, right? And that's kind of, for some reason, came through really strongly yesterday and wants to come through today too at the beginning of this episode to kind of start it off. So kind of a complex concept, but something that really hit me hard and something I've been chewing on over the last day, trying to figure out exactly what it means in the larger context of Genesis, right? But just to kind of walk you through a little bit of what I have here, for those of you that are viewing me on either YouTube, Rumble, or Spotify, you do have video content this time again, which I hope you're enjoying. And I do have a bunch of other sites over here, a different view. So if we want to watch some videos, if we want to read some stuff, we want to talk to Grok or ChatGPT or any of these other sites, we can do that. And you can follow along with me. I think those pauses in the last episodes where I'm searching and typing is, while it's not bad, it is kind of relaxing to just listen to the background music while that's happening. There is a little bit of lost opportunity in that I'm looking at things that you could be looking at too. So you can do that now. For those of you who aren't joining us on any of those platforms and are listening to the show on any other just audio-based platform, no worries. The show shouldn't change too much for you. Like I said, it's more adding that additional content for those of you who would like to. If you would like to access that content, right, just check out the show on YouTube, Spotify, or Rumble. I'll show you really quick where you can find that. So my YouTube channel here, let's view it. You can find it here at youtube.com/@theunfounded. All right, some of these are a little different. It's not all the Unfounded Pod or podcast specifically because I made some other pages earlier and then lost access to those pages a few years ago. So I had to remake them and wasn't able to use the same name, if that makes sense. So you can find the YouTube page at @theunfounded, youtube.com/@theunfounded. Spotify, you can find it just by searching the podcast, right? This is more my page for how the podcast is doing. But Spotify, you can go to just Spotify, type in the Unfounded Podcast. For Rumble, same kind of thing. It's super easy. This is the page you'll see when you go there. But type in the Unfounded Podcast, it'll pop up. There's also going to be Chris the Sage pages on some of these video platforms because I'm going to be doing some other streaming things there that I was doing on sites like TikTok here, right? I'm going to be doing some of this stuff a little bit more as TikTok has kind of a sketchy future, specifically today, ending today. I'm going to be doing some of this on other platforms as well, YouTube specifically and Rumble, right? So follow me on those if you haven't already. And then any of the other platforms, take a look we have some other announcements, but we'll get to that at the end of the show. I don't want to take too much time here at the beginning. I just wanted to point that out for those of you who do want to access the video portion of the show. All right, so without further ado, I think we should get started here. That was quite a bit that I started with here at the beginning of the show. Let me pull open our Bible here. And actually, we will go through a little bit of a walkthrough here of the books. You can now see the books that I've been using. So real quick, and bear with us, audio listeners here, for the moment being, or the point being, point in time, moment being, something like that. This is the Bible. This is the reason I want to show it to you. Is it's kind of a cool little thing I've got here. This is a Bible that I was given when I was born, actually, by my godmother and my aunt. Right. So it's kind of special to me. This is the one we're reading from, and I've never actually read it cover to cover all the way through. Right. This is the Bible that was very special to me, and I have read at times different snippets of, but you can't really see for some reason. It's not wanting to because of the reflection. Anyway, you get the point. Beautiful kind of white bound Bible, and in the King James version itself. I do have the Penguin copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, so that's what we've been reading from here. If any of you have joined me for any of Marcus's stuff, we read this actually on TikTok about 1.5 years ago on Lives, which went really well. It was really popular, really well received. Had some great conversations. We'll definitely do some more content like that here in the future as well. And then the Book of Enoch, the Prophet, for any of you that want to follow along with us as well. This is one that we're using quite a bit. This is just the version that I have here. It's, what is it? Book of Enoch, the Prophet. This one's by R.H. Charles, right? So, and it is, this is published by Wiser Books, right there. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully it'll zoom. The zoom is not super, or the autofocus, is not super good on this camera, but at least the video quality is pretty decent for us, so. And then finally, last but certainly not least, because this sucker is a beast, is The Secret Teachings of All Ages, right, by Manly P. Hall. This is one that we've been talking about quite a bit. Here, let me see if I can get it all in. It's a big book, so I have to zoom, go back a little bit. But it's by Manly P. Hall. It's really interesting. Like I said, I've spoken about before in other episodes, especially the first handful of ones. We reference this quite a bit, and I'm sure we will at some point in the future. But as we talked about in last episode, there isn't very much on Abram or Abraham, either title in this book, and not as much either on the kind of the other terms like Canaanite and stuff that we've been looking up. So just right now, it's not revealing very much, but I'm sure it will in the future, and it has a ton of information, as you can see, from most traditions throughout history. So really interesting book. Go ahead and pick it up if at your Barnes & Noble or wherever you can find it. It's on Amazon, I'm sure, too. I think I got it at Barnes & Noble. So without further ado, let me take a drink of my tea, and we will get back into chapter 14, and we are also going to do chapter 15, because that's what we did yesterday, and it seemed fitting. I don't want to kind of stop halfway in between this time. But that being said, we're also going to kind of cover just a little bit of a recap of where we're at, and fill you guys in for those of you who may be joining us and have not listened to the previous episodes. Before we do that, let me get a drink of tea real quick. I almost did it. I need to be really careful about that. It is hard when you're producing and you're doing this all by yourself, because you have to develop some very good habits first, which is what I've been trying to do over the last couple of days, of how to do things and where buttons are and things like that, so that when I'm in the middle of the show, I don't have to take too much time out of the show to do the production side. And I'm hoping, because I think I can, I'll get into why that's funny for me here in a second too, but that this is something that most people, podcasts, video podcasts especially, usually have a decent production to them, and a lot of times people have people helping them, but I think that you can do a lot of it yourself, especially with the technology, the way it's advanced over the last couple of years. So I'm trying to do that, but you have to know all sides of it, and that can be complicated and a little bit stressful at times. So hence the organization and the habit forming that is necessary, right? Anyway, I digress. The one thing I did want to say before I went on, because it was kind of funny, is for any of you who may have, and actually, you know what? I'll show you it right now. I won't show the whole video, but it seems fitting intuitively for whoever's watching right now. Any of you who used to watch or is a fan or read any of the Little Engine That Could stories when you were a kid, right? Let's see if I can pull it up. There is a movie when I was a kid that I used to watch over and over and over again that I found, because it's not very popular. It's not like on any of the streaming platforms. I used to have on VHS over on YouTube, right? And I will kind of show it to you here so that if you want to watch it, because it feels, like I said, intuitively like this is meant for you as a viewer as well, to watch it yourself. I recommend watching it because it's very nostalgic in weird ways, and the characters themselves are very nostalgic, and the story itself is something that kind of popped in my head a lot as I've been going through the changes I've been going through, and I forgot about this movie specifically all the way up until a couple of weeks ago, until I found it again. Something reminded me of it, and I found it. And I am shocked now that I watched it again. It reconnected memories to when I was a kid, that this was one of my favorite things as a kid, right? So how did I forget it? I don't know. Anyway, this is it, The Little Engine That Could, right? And like I said, I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'll just skip around here and show you a little bit. But there's some characters here that are kind of cool. Like I said, very nostalgic for me, but for some reason it seems relevant to you guys. The Little Engine That Could, the kind of moral of the story is that you need to keep going, right? Through all of the challenges, everything that's happening around you. And that's something that's really inspired me. And as I reflect back on how I started this podcast, is really kind of the theme, it looks like, of this episode, is that the world is not designed to be easy. It's actually very specifically designed kind of the opposite way, to be hard in exactly the ways you need to identify where you need to grow, right? This is teaching, this is learning, actually, the process of learning, but described in a more spiritual way, right? But from what I understand now, and as I've taught myself and learned more academically how to learn, I recognize that the process of learning doesn't only encompass academia. It actually the skill set is broad, and learning to teach yourself is something that you need to learn as you're growing spiritually, because you don't know what you don't know, and you don't really have anybody externally that knows all of the answers that you're looking for. You have to find them, right? So in order to do that, you kind of have to venture through these really scary areas, as in this story. If you decide to go watch it, it's not very long. It's like 30 minutes long. Kind of goes through very well, outlines very well. And as I reflected on it, I recognized the other night why it was so important to me as a child. And it hit me. It was like emotional, right? I was crying, and as silly as it sounds in certain parts of it, because I didn't know why. And I remembered one of the first parts of the memories that came back was I didn't know why I was so interested in this movie. I loved trains. So that was one part of it. I was fascinated with trains, always have been. But why was I so interested in the story of the little engine that could? One, because the little engine in this story is a girl train, right? Which, as a little boy, isn't usually the story that you're going to resonate with as much. But I did. I really resonated with the character as a kid. It didn't matter to me. I actually didn't even know that it was supposed to be a girl train, I think, until recently, until this recent watch. But it wasn't about that. It was about something else. And what I realized was that it was about the story. There was something in this story that was outlining at least how my life has gone up until this point, up until when I watched it again. That it was going to be kind of a steep climb, I think, to sum it up in a couple words. And that I was going to have to be kind of brave and courageous and resilient and adamant, right? And that I think I can attitude, growing that from I think I can into I know I can, right? And then reaching the summit, going through all of the roadblocks that are in your way. That is something that is necessary if you want to make something new in this world. That is something that's necessary for the entire world moving forward, because the world is needing change, right? But not the kind of change that you hear about politically on a stage, that we've heard about for the last 10 years politically, used as a trope. I mean real change, the change that requires individuals to make sacrifices and to learn themselves, not from some government agency, some institution outside of themselves, but to really ask whatever they believe in, whatever they want to call that thing they believe in, teach me, show me, and to embrace the suck as it comes, because that is the mountain in that story that I was just going over. So, we digress again. Let's get back on the point here, because we're pretty far into the episode already and we haven't started the Bible yet, but we do have 2 chapters to get through today. We're going to do 14 and 15. But to sum up where we are at here, folks, we've gone through a lot, right? We're all through Genesis, so we've covered Adam, we've covered Noah, we've covered and Noah's sons, right? Shem, Lot, and Ham. It was Ham, I think, or Shem. One of those were the bad brother that ends up kind of shaming Noah. And then you have Abram, a couple generations down, right? Like 30, so probably like 15 generations or so between Abram and Noah. And we're at Abram right now. He's just introduced. He's a very pivotal figure. And one of the things I learned yesterday, that we don't need to research again in this episode, but that I learned from X, from Grok, and from ChatGPT, was that Abraham isn't one of those characters or figures, like other figures like Enoch, that there's a lot of the content of his was removed. There are some areas where there's more written about, like more details about Abraham and his journeys, but from what I gathered, most of it aligns for the most part, right? So there's not a lot of controversy from what I can see with Abraham, which is interesting, right? Or Abram as a figure, historically, specifically. Abram and Abraham is the patriarch of the Jewish lineage, right? So he's a big figure in that way as well, but also spiritually, he's significant because he's one of the figures, these 3 first figures that were introduced, Adam, Noah, and Abram, that answer the call that God is putting out, right? And it's kind of shown in varying degrees of magnification. We start with Adam, right? And there's this very kind of high-level conversation about what you are, why I made you, and what your job and role is. Then after the fall from the casting out of Eden, after we eat from the tree of knowledge, right? When we disobey, we become conscious, and there's a whole new set of problems that enters the world then. And then we start to procreate ourselves, and we become a different thing then, because we're no longer created directly from God. So there's a little separation there. But the conversation changes because the next person in that lineage, after a lot of people, because it gets to a point where God's like, this isn't working, right? There's a whole bunch in there with Enoch and the Watchers and all of that, but watch the other episodes if you want more details, right? I don't want to get too bogged down in trying to recap it every time. Right? I want to be able to get to the new content if we can, right? But Noah and Abram and Adam all have this certain conversation that's going on, and it goes from Adam that's very high level, and it's something like I said, and then there's like, this is what you are and this is what your role is. You fail at that. It goes on to Noah. Noah receives the call, and God makes another covenant with him, kind of another talk, but another agreement with him, saying, I'm going to kind of bless your lineage and your line. You need to enforce it, though, after the flood, right? He wipes everything out. And Noah kind of does enforce it, but there's kind of a suggestion that he doesn't do it well enough, because it's necessary again with Abram, because God comes to Abram and starts another covenant. Now, the part we just read about is important, the previous chapter 13, because it's about Abram and when Abram is introduced, right? And so Abram has a wife, Sarai, and Abram is introduced as this old he's not old in the Bible context, years, but he's 75 years old and he's living with his father still. And God comes to him and says, hey, get off your ass, get out there, go do something productive, right? And I'll bless you if you do. So it's another kind of higher level conversation. And then Abram kind of questions for a second, but then he's like, okay, I'll go. He convinces everybody to go with him. He goes out into the desert and he comes upon Egypt. He's kind of wandering for a while, is kind of suggested. And then he comes upon Egypt. There's a bunch of good things in Egypt. And so Abram tells Sarai, hey, if we go into Egypt, because they're probably thirsty and hungry, they're probably going to think you're really attractive, right? Because you are really attractive. You're my wife. And the Pharaoh's going to want to take you as his wife. Or at the very least, all the other Egyptians are going to want to take you from me. So they're probably going to kill me, right? So to avoid that, let's just say that you're my sister. We'll get around that. We'll get our water and all the stuff that we need, and we'll be out of here. We'll be comfortable at least and alive, all of us. Sarai agrees to this. What happens next is the Pharaoh, over a period of time, gets cursed by God because he ends up taking Sarai into his house, marrying her in their tradition, essentially kind of consummating that marriage. And then after that happens, that's a sin in the eyes of God because she is already married to Abram, and not just anybody, but one of God's chosen kind of emissaries, right? So he punishes Pharaoh, and he punishes not only Pharaoh, but all of Egypt, because he recognizes that somebody as powerful as Pharaoh, the way that you can really punish them is by kind of punishing what they own, taking what they own, affecting what they have. So he does that, and he plagues all of Egypt. And in this, both Pharaoh, somehow, it doesn't really go into this, chapter 13, both Pharaoh and Abram recognized that they were at fault for this. And Pharaoh kind of tells Abram, get out of here with Sarai. He finds out that Sarai is his wife. And he says, why did you do this to me? This was really dumb. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? This didn't need to happen. Get out of here. And Abram's like, okay. But as Abram leaves, Abram has a bunch of gold and silver and horses and camels and everything he needs. And the Pharaoh doesn't take that away because the Pharaoh gave him all those things because he was happy, because he thought Sarai was his sister. So traditionally in that there would be kind of a dowry, essentially, right? I think that you'd pay. So he's essentially benefiting off of selling his wife to the Pharaoh. And this is something that I didn't recognize when I first read the chapter a couple episodes back. But as I read it the second time and the third time, I recognized that the motivation of Abram is a little more twisted than I thought initially. And we'll get into that a little later as we get to that part of the new chapters. But Abram, I don't think, was only motivated out of self-preservation as he initially puts on. There's something more sinister going on that is very subtle in the Bible, but also really revealing. We'll get to that in just a second. So that's where we pick up, right? Is they're cast out. They've journeyed out into the desert essentially, and after they're cast out, they leave with Lot, which is his nephew, right? His brother's son, and all of the people that have come with him. So they have this huge group of people that travels with them, helps them take care of their herd, right? And they come to this place of kind of vacancy. There's nobody. They're in this land where there isn't anybody, and it's fairly fertile in most areas, right? But a couple of the people from Lot's tribe and a couple of people from Abram's tribe get into like fights over things. It sounds like it's not super specific, but they're from different areas, different regions, different tribes, right? It says Canaanites and I think Perizzites in the specific passage. So it suggests that there's some kind of tribal conflict, and that conflict rises all the way up to boils over to a point where the leader of the tribe, Lot, says, hey, I'm going to go talk to Abram and settle this. So he goes over to Abram and says, hey, Abram, let's go. Let's separate, right? Obviously, we're not doing very well here together. There's all this land. All of it's fairly fertile. I think we should separate. And Abram's like, sure. You know what? Whichever way you want to go, I'll go the other way, right? Because I'm not trying to have any problems either. He's trying to give him an olive branch. Again, deeper, there's something else going on there we'll go into in a little bit. And Lot decides to go towards Jordan, it says. It's like this fertile, very green place towards Jordan. The very end of the chapter ends with Abram going the other direction, and then he goes and he builds his camp, builds his tent, and then he builds an altar immediately. That's the first thing he does. And the And I believe he points it towards the direction of the mountain where he first had his vision with the Lord, right? If I'm not mistaken. Lot, on the other hand, goes and builds his camp in this place, this fertile plain near Jordan. And he points, as it says very specifically, he points his tents towards Sodom, right? Which is very kind of figurative and suggests something deeper there. And I didn't realize or recognize the first time we read through it. So that's also very important here moving forward. But we're going to go ahead and read the next couple chapters, and we'll dive in. Yeah, I'm just going to read the last line of chapter 13, where Abram pointed his tent. It says, "Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord." So it doesn't say he directed it to a certain direction, but he went to a different place, it seems. Okay. So chapter 14. It says, this is on page 18, Abram settles in Canaan. "And it came to pass in the days of Araphel," and bear with me here because this first section of this chapter is a little hard. The pronunciations are difficult. It's all a bunch of names that are hard to say, so just bear with me. We'll sum it up after we get through it. It gets better at the end, I promise. Ameraphel, king of Shinar; Arioch, king of Elazar, Shedor Lao Mer, king of Elam, and title king of nations. That these made war with Berah, king of Sodom, and with Birsha, king of Gomorrah. Shinab, king of Admah, and Shember, king of Zeboim, and king of Bela, which is in Zoar. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Shedor La Mer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Shedor La Omer, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Shaveh, Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to En Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazez Zon Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela. And they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with the Shedor La Omer, the king of Elam, and the title king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5, and the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm now tired from trying to pronounce everything. I'm mispronouncing normal words that I know. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner. And these were confederated with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought back again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Shedor La Omer, and the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies unto thy hand. And he gave them tithes of all. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. And that is the end of chapter 14. All right, so a little bit to break down there, right? This is a very interesting chapter, right? And thank you for bearing with me through that, because I know it's not very fun to listen to me try to pronounce some of those names. They're not very easy to read, too. Unfortunately, there's a lot of symbols above the letters, inflections that I'm not familiar with, so I have to try to guess a little bit. But I hope I didn't butcher them too bad for us. Anyway, it's an important chapter, right? But it's also very subtle, and we're going to go over, a little bit of what I was talking about earlier here. Now that we've read that, so it is a subtle chapter, and one of the ways it's subtle is in the way that Abram's reacting here. We need to break it down a little bit more. A little bit of, green tea for the throat. It helps keep your throat clear while you're talking, right? Especially if you talk as much as I do. But there's some subtle things going on with Abram here, and it reveals, I think, a little bit more about what Abram is going through, right? So one of the things that's happening with Abram is and it's not very easy to tell because of how the Bible is written right there. With all those names and stuff, you kind of get distracted. You kind of go like a little cross-eyed for a second when you hear all the names and like the way it's pronounced. You get confused and you're just thinking too hard about what it was saying. You miss the point. He's in a state of shock, I think. At least this is what I've come to think. And the way I came to figure this out was in the way he's kind of responding to some of the situations that are being presented to him. Right. You have to think, and we went over this in last episode, and it was kind of a clarification on something that I said in the previous one, or I said maybe in that one, that I thought Abram benefited. Obviously, I was trying to figure out why the introduction of Abram is so complicated. It's so confusing because it seems backwards that Abram gets rewarded with all of this wealth and sustenance when he's done something so kind of despicable and cowardly. And I think we came to in the last episodes that it's because the world isn't entirely ruled by only good things. It's where the substrate and the energy comparison comes in, right? The world is made out of things, stuff, right? You call it atoms if you want to go all the way down to the basis or deeper than that, but you can refer to it whatever you want, the foundational thing, right? It's made out of that hard stuff we can touch and see and feel and hear. The other stuff, right? The stuff that vibrates, the stuff that makes you feel emotion, the stuff that makes you long, for things. Believe, love, Some of the emotions that we describe as only human sensations, I think, are actually expressions of a deeper, different substance. It's not matter-based in that way, but can be expressed through matter in a certain way so that it runs through the substrate, right? Something like this. And because of that, this is so interesting because this is the exact same song that came on yesterday at the same time. 2, 3, 4. This is an important message that's coming through right now because something really didn't want me to hear this or say this, I don't think. So I'm going to take my time here, so give me a second. Because I could be wrong about this too, which is why I'm pausing here, because something really is pointing this out, 311. So maybe this isn't, the way I'm going this direction isn't exactly correct with the story interpretation. I don't know, but I'm going to continue to explain it to you, and we're going to hold it in context so that as we move forward, I can try to understand whatever is trying to communicate with me right now and tell me this, because it's very directly. This is the same song and the same point in time coming on that's playing in my headset right now, which I'll put at the same time here for you guys so that you can hear what's going on right now. But the way the music shifts, that is happening at the same time it happened in last episode. And all of the issues I had, I lost that message. And one of the reasons I thought I lost that message was partially because maybe I said something that was incorrect and asserted it as correct. 400, yes. So, it's important that we, each individually, recognize, or at the very least, because like I said, this is very unsettling music, as you can probably tell as a listener. It's hard to tell whether what's happening now is meant to help me or distract us. So I'm going to continue to say what I was going to say earlier, because that was very distracting. But we're going to hold it, like I said, with a grain of salt and see what comes of the next couple chapters as we move forward. I'm going to say, I don't know if this is true, is what I'm saying. But that there's the substrate, the hard stuff, the matter, and then there's the energy that runs through it. And the energy has a positive or negative charge. This is what we refer to as the angels or the demons, and that these, or the good or bad aspects of life, right? But that we as souls ourselves have a positive or negative charge that we determine based on the type of energy we project outward, right? What we think about, essentially, is the best way to put it, I think, in the human context, right? So, Abram gets rewarded, right, for doing something very bad because he is maybe that's why it's not right. There's some, and this is something that's really confounding that maybe I'm going to really have to chew on for a while. And maybe you as a listener, if you have any ideas, post in the comments. But why do you think, as a listener, Abram gets rewarded for doing something kind of as despicable as pretending his wife is his sister and essentially selling her? That's basically what he's doing, right? He knows that the Pharaoh's going to want her. And the part that I got into yesterday that I think is really true, a deeper part of the story that we don't think about, is if that's the case, I mean, he obviously knows that they're going to want her because that's the reasoning he uses to tell her that he needs to pretend she's his sister. So wouldn't he also connect that there's rewards that would come with that if she was his sister and the Pharaoh wanted to marry her? Right? I think so. I think that's a deeper part of the motivation of Abram that is being revealed here for us. And I can't see anything that's wrong with that interpretation. So it makes me think that maybe it could be pretty spot on and something's trying to distract, or like I said, I'll take it with a grain of salt. Let you as a listener comment on what you think it is. But that if you take that a little deeper, Abram quite possibly could have known that. I don't know this, but we're going to postulate this. Again, grain of salt. But when he is telling Sarai, hey, pretend to be my sister, how much of him knew that he was going to be rewarded for that? I mean, he obviously didn't know that Pharaoh was going to react that way, so it wasn't guaranteed. But if he knew that she was a really attractive woman, you know that the most powerful person in that place is that's what happened in that time frame, right? The most beautiful women were reserved for the rulers. the most beautiful people. It wasn't just women, right? And they would reserve themselves in that way. Like they had ownership in that. So they asserted ownership over people. I'm not condoning that by any means, but just describing it, right? So there's a possibility that Abram knew that he would be rewarded for that. So that's a deeper sin, isn't it, than what we thought it was before? Like that's a sin that's very deal with the devil like, so to speak, where you're doing something, you're breaking a covenant with somebody who you're supposed to protect. And because of that, you need to always identify as such. You need to always properly identify who she is to you in relation to the world. And when you don't do that, when you lie about that, even if it was for the more innocent explanation, there's a sin in that. But that's why the story is confusing, is because that's not told, the deeper reasoning. It's not usually seen. It's subtle. And I think the reason why it's subtle is because human beings are that way. The Bible is a brilliant book. It's trying to describe to you more than what it's saying with words. It's trying to show you with the story, almost in like a movie-like way, how people act, right? And people, when they're doing things that nefarious, they hide it, right? And even when they get caught, they hide it. As a matter of fact, the only way you can tell sometimes that they've done something wrong is by the thing that they did it for, because it sticks around. Just bringing us full circle to the explanation of why Abram still has all the riches when he leaves Egypt. Why God doesn't call out the Pharaoh and tell him to retake all of the things he gave him. It seems like a more logical step, actually. It seems more specifically like maybe God compelled Pharaoh to not take the stuff back, because you'd think a ruler would want to probably even kill that person that lied about that. Doesn't. Most likely out of reverence for the ramifications he's just experienced, right? This is a smaller version story, as we saw with Abram, Noah, and Adam, right? Of the coming Passover kind of story, right? Of Exodus, right? So there's an interesting kind of miniature version of that here in this story of Abram, where the Pharaoh in Egypt are being plagued by God because of the way that they're treating kind of one of God's chosen people, essentially. And it's not because the person is chosen, I don't think. It's more because that person is adhering better than the other people that surround them to God's law, at least to whatever level they can understand it in their consciousness at that current time. Which is why they're not perfect and why they're confusing and confounding individuals sometimes, I think, right? As Abram is in the beginning. But nonetheless, I would think that God would probably influence the Pharaoh. That it makes more sense that that's probably why Pharaoh doesn't do that. Because the punishment is the things. I really do think that is the answer there. So again, but because of the music, the way it shifted, I don't know if that is an energy that's trying to mess with me and interrupt it. Comment. Let me know in the comments what you think, or comment, let me know what you think the better explanation for why Abram is still retains all of the wealth and stuff in that story. Why? Because it does make more sense that the Pharaoh would just take it from him, right? Or kill him outright. Why doesn't he do that? Let me know. All right. So it's a confounding story. If Abram did do that, if Abram did intentionally sell, that's why I say sell Sarai to the Pharaoh, then those things would be a burden that he'd carry. And he was leaving, as we talked about in previous episodes, Egypt with his head held very low with Sarai, his wife, who is probably very unhappy with him. Because you have to describe this, and I have to use kind of very blunt words to do it, but you have to describe this for what it is. This is a coward. As a matter of fact, this isn't just a coward. This is somebody that's greedy and has no shame, apparently, in that moment when they were doing it, because they were willing to sacrifice the most valuable relationship they have in their life for something as trivial as in the best version, existential preservation, in the worst version, monetary and, physical benefit. So I can't imagine Sarai is very happy that she's married to him still. She's also just had an example of why she can't just leave him because she just watched all of Egypt be plagued by God for somebody messing with their relationship. So what happens if she messes with it? I don't think it's going to end very well. You know what I mean? So I think that's probably why Sarai isn't like one of the modern women saying like, my independence now after that, because I wouldn't want to after just watching all of Egypt plagued. This guy's really talking to God, I think, at the very least. Even he's not perfect, but he really is talking to something. So anyway. Oh, I like that. Anyway. So he's had his head is held very low, and I'm sure he doesn't have very good, his esteem, his reputation is the word I'm looking for, is very low as well with the people that travel with him, because he doesn't just leave with him and Sarai. He leaves with him Sarai and Lot and all of their people again, which is when we come to the story of that we're reading about. I talked about earlier, and then the part we're at here now. So that when we go back to the discussion that Lot is having last week with Abram, it's a little different too, right? The different interpretation we just went over for the introduction of Abram in Egypt is now it affects every other conversation moving forward, if that is true, right? Because it means the reason that it gives us a reason for why Abram acts the way he does. Whereas before we think Abram's just being a nice guy, right? You take the other side, I'll take the other one. That's how it's taught in Sunday school, catechism. When in reality, I think the real reason is kind of revealed in the revelation we just described, is that if Abram's thoughts were more nefarious, then he probably hid them to most people, which is why we get that better version of the story, maybe even himself, so that Sarai and them probably never got the full truth from him directly, so that it has to be gleaned divinely by you, the reader, thousands of years ago. You can only tell by reading him, the person, like I said, in the way you would an actor on the screen or somebody talking in front of you. Why are you acting this way, dude? Right? So then go to that conversation, and the reason that he doesn't say, hey, I'm going to take this side or I'm going to take that side is partially because dude's in a pit. He's not feeling too hot about himself. Right? As a matter of fact, it makes more sense why Lot feels ballsy enough to approach him and say, "Hey, dude, let's settle this." He's kind of stepping out of his place, because Lot, while he is a patriarch and he does have his own kind of tribe to a certain degree, he is Abram's nephew. Abram is the patriarch, right? And so this splitting of the tribes is something that Abram could say yes to or no to, and if Abram says no to, then Lot is not going to be too happy anymore. He's not going to be too powerful anymore, I guess is what you mean. I'm not saying he's necessarily going to take him out. I would hope not, but you get what I'm saying. The option there for Abram is not he's not talking to his equal, which is how the conversation is approached, which means that Lot doesn't have the respect for Abram that he should have, right? Why is that the case? Because they know that they've been sent out into the desert again because of this dude. Everything was great. We were just in Egypt. We were doing just fine. Matter of fact, he has all of this good shit now, but for some frickin' reason, and they might have known because of what he did, we're out here, right? Thanks, patriarch kind of an attitude, you know what I mean? So no respect for your elders, more specifically, no respect for your father, kind of as a corollary, no respect for the father, right? As a representation of that. No respect for the father, which is why you see what happens next in the story happen, right? So Lot ends up going to the left, or I think it says whatever side, the side that's greener, essentially, the better side he picks, because Abram's like, just take whatever side. And now it makes more sense, right? Because that's how he says it. Just take whatever side. He's kind of in this pit, this hole. He's ashamed of himself. He doesn't know how he can assert himself anymore. He is the leader, but he doesn't feel like he should be the leader anymore. He doesn't respect himself. So he's just doing whatever he can to not make a mistake. Just take whatever side. I'll take the other one. And so Lot does, and Lot kind of takes advantage too. He does take the better side, right? In that sense. And also makes a big mistake at the same time because he points his tent towards Sodom. And what is that telling you? Guess where Cain found his home? Does that make sense? Right? It's telling us subtly, that original story, where Cain, it's helping us track that spirit down. In that split, it split with Lot. Abram made a split there as well, right? Well, Abram obviously was carrying that same spirit all the way up until that point. That's why Egypt happened. At that moment, it's very subtle. Now Lot's over there, and Lot's pointing his tents towards Sodom, so he's worshiping the earth. He's the world. He's worshiping the earthly gods, kings, right? And all of the earthly pleasures, right? But Abram turns back to what he knows, and he goes and builds another shrine to his God, and he prays, right? And he goes basically into the desert again, kind of a fasting. He doesn't say that overtly. He doesn't go to like this really nice place. He goes back to a place where he found God. And that really is the story of awakening going on there that, again, is very subtle. It's not said in those terms. You have to view it like a movie, but I do think is revealed a little bit better once we understand why Abram is acting the way he's acting. And I think as we move forward into chapter 15, will give us even a little more context. So let's move forward after chapter 14 here and read chapter 15, because it's also very important. Actually, no, I'm sorry, but before we do that, I have more of chapter 14 to cover. Forgive me for the jumping back and forth here today, guys, because if you do this episode for now, what's been about 3.5 hours in total, you confuse what you said before and what you haven't said between yesterday and today. So there might be some overlap. If there is, apologies. That won't happen again, hopefully, as we get the production down a little bit better. But anyway, so what moves on, what happens after that story, right, is in this chapter 14, because we didn't even really cover chapter 14, is you have this war that starts, right? So for some reason I thought that was chapter 15. No, we just read it. This war starts. And at the beginning, you had me reading all those goofy, funny names that I couldn't pronounce very well, right? Not goofy inherently, but goofy because I can't say them well. I can't pronounce them very well, and so they come out goofy. Those are all a bunch of kings of what I imagine are city-states, right, all around the area. So you have a bunch of these tribes or rulers that are all band together, essentially, to invade and conquer Sodom and Gomorrah, which are kind of like city-states that I believe have kings, but they each have individual rulers, but they operate very closely together, or they're very close in land. They're right around each other, right? I know they're very near each other at the very least. So these kings, and that's what that's speaking about, is these kings are all banding together, and they go and they conquer Sodom and Gomorrah. They kill the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they take everything, right? And they're off gallivanting. And one of the things that they take all the spoils back to wherever they came from, right? And one of the things they take, obviously, is Lot and all of the people, his people, because Lot was right kind of camped out there near Sodom. And so this certain person, I don't know if he actually is named here, it doesn't look like, goes and tells Abram, like, hey, look, Abram, brother of Eshcol, the Amorite brother of Eshcol is the way he's referred to, goes and says, hey, Abram, somebody's taken Lot. He lets him know what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. And the first thing that Abram does, I mean, what would you think he'd do? Right? The first thing that Abram does is, I mean, he is at his lowest. He has nothing. He's ashamed. Like, all he has is that stuff, right? But he doesn't really have anything else. He's kind of estranged, cast out. He says that Lot's in trouble. He, I'm sure, knows that Lot has kind of taken advantage of the situation. So he's probably not on good terms with Lot, I can't imagine. I don't know if you would walk away from that situation having a good view of your nephew, but I'm sure would have been a little bit turned off by the way that conversation went and the way we talked about it earlier. So his reaction to pop up and go help, he gathers all his people and to go and help immediately, is one, kind of shocking from that perspective, but then two, this is not very many people we're talking about, right? Abram does not have a huge army. Abram is kind of a herder, right? He raises animals, sheep, I believe, mostly, probably some other animals scattered in there. And so there's just people that maintain the flock in the herd, and they move around together and they maintain their little kind of town, nomadic town. Not a huge fighting force, but he gathers all the men and they go and they attack this fighting force. And it's not just a fighting force, it's a fighting force of 4 or 5 different armies all combined together, which it was a big enough fighting force to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, which were the biggest cities, if I'm not mistaken, at that time in that area. So the biggest army that anybody has seen at that point in that region, at least contemporarily. And then Abram decides with his band of kind of misfits, we're going to go attack that group and take all this shit back. Again, it doesn't come through when you read it the first time as well as when you read it a couple of times and you say it in more plain terms. This dude is doing something that is insane in past context and in modern context. This is the equivalent of one guy or like 10 guys going and trying to fight an entire modern army, right? It's ridiculous. It's insane. Maybe not a whole modern army, but say like a whole military base, right? To say that. It's still insane, right? And he does this, and he goes and he gets Lot back, and he gets all of the stuff back. And the way he does it is they go and they attack at night. So it's kind of this guerrilla warfare story. He has them split up. He goes off one direction, his guys go off, and they kind of, from what it sounds like, flank wherever these people are, their camp, and surprise them at night. Defeat this massive army. They're incredibly outnumbered. And then they go and bring all the stuff back to sounds like the new king or rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the new kings are like, take whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like they're like, why did you do that? Are you okay? You know what I mean? Like, how did you do that? The one guy who, this is a king, like I said, this is a king that does not worship God. Or wait, no, excuse me, before I misspeak. This is not king of Sodom. This is a king of Salem. So this is different. This is Melchizedek, and Melchizedek is a godly person, it says. But he praises Abram and says, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all." So this is the one that says, "And now take whatever you need," right? And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, "Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself." Oh, interesting. So this is subtle too. Maybe there's a reason this is being pointed out too. There's a difference here. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portions." Okay, so not as much of a clarification as I thought, but he is very overtly, regardless of how they're approaching it. So there's two different kings. There's one that is a godly king, and there's one that's not a godly king, and they both basically say the same thing. Hey, take whatever you want. The first one says, this is a miracle, what you just did. This is fantastic. Praise God. What do you need, right? Take whatever you need. And then the other one is kind of like, dude, why did you do that? That's freaking nuts. Thanks, but take whatever you need. It's so one's like a secular or like a non-religious view, not necessarily just secular, but it's almost like this oh wow kind of a thing. But it's not. It's a non-believing view, and there's one is a believing view. But it doesn't matter how it's being offered. He says, my God told me not to accept any of this. Right? I'm not going to accept any of this. And more specifically, the only thing that I am going to take is kind of the food that we need for the people that fought with me, for everybody that's been affected by this. Let them take their fill, right? And this is a different Abram, tying together, kind of summarizing why I think this is related, right? A growth that you're seeing in Abram as a character is something that we haven't gotten a high enough resolution yet in the Bible at this point in Genesis to really see. But we're seeing Abram grow. He's going from that person who sold his wife to the Pharaoh for riches to a person who was lost in the desert for years and basically had no self-confidence, and a person who basically won't make a decision, do whatever you guys want to do, to a person who actively makes the opposite choice when presented the same situation, right? And it's actually not even the same situation. He could probably take all that stuff and nothing bad is going to happen. But he now recognizes, and that's why it's so subtle, and that's why that key is left there in this story. The things, the riches that he walks out of Egypt with, it's not just a descriptive kind of coloring that they're adding there. That's very, very necessary to understand the point of the whole story, right? He's carrying that weight. It's a symbol, all of those things, of his mistake, that mistaken choice in Egypt, to hide, to lie. That when it represents itself here, he's offered things again, even in a context where he hasn't done anything wrong for it. He still says no. Why? Because he's recognizing, subtly for the audience, if nothing else, for anybody that's there watching in the moment, anybody that will hear that story as we are later in history, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm recognizing the things that I got before. That motivation was why everything went sideways, right? It's very subtle. This is so subtle, right? I don't want the things because the things confuse me. I don't want the things because the things aren't why I should be doing this stuff, right? I shouldn't have been motivated in Egypt to sell my wife because I wanted stuff. Even though I said I wanted to save my own skin, I didn't actually want to save my own skin, right? So you don't get it confirmed in the way I just confirmed it for you, or described in the way I just described it for you either, when you read these stories. But I hope that makes sense to you. And like I said, that is my opinion. That is my interpretation of these stories up until this point. If you disagree with me, leave something in the comments in Spotify, any of the apps that allow commenting. I'll try to find them and gather them all in one space, but respond to them when I can, and respond to them here in the show when I can. That being said, I do think I am going to leave it there today. I think part of the reason it got cut off yesterday too is that I went a little too long in the show. So I said we're going to do chapter 14 and 15, but we're just going to do chapter 14 because I think that was plenty of content to chew on for the next week, right? 15 is also very interesting and relevant, but in terms of that part of the Abram story, 14 was really the important piece there. So I'm glad I didn't move on there earlier. But that being said, I want to wish everybody, which I forgot to do at the beginning of the show here, a really happy new year. It's been a good one for me so far. It's been kind of a quiet one here with just me and Dixie at the house. But it's been kind of refreshing too, to get a little bit of time of quiet in the house for this kind of production, and to iron out some of the issues I've been having with other stuff. And it really was very productive. So the year has started off brilliantly for me. I hope it is also going very smoothly for you, even if the world doesn't look like it is. Tune out from the world for a little bit and focus on yourself. Not in a selfish way, right? But in a way that really identifies, as I was talking about with that earlier with that train show, right? Who you are and what you enjoy. So, and why you enjoy it, not just what you enjoy, but why. That's what will unlock the feeling that you're looking for of happiness, of laughter, of solace that you used to have when you were a kid. You have to figure out why you liked what you liked, not just what. All right. So with that, I think that is going to be the Unfounded podcast for today, guys. I want to thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video portion of the show. I hope everything went smoothly in the recording. If it did, you will see this episode. If not, you'll probably see a third attempt here at another day. But that being said, I don't think that's going to be the case. Please check out all of my social media. Again, we'll go do that one more time. We'll double check all of the social media pages. We already went over kind of my socials, I guess, but you can find me on X as well. If you want to check me out on X, I have a page. It's under Chris the Sage, though. I'm not doing an Unfounded page on there because it's certain platforms doesn't really work with, right? But I do post content from my other pages on here, so you can kind of get updates from here as well. And I'm going to be doing a lot more on X as well. But I can never do this. Patreon, because patron and Patreon are very close words, and I always want to say patron and Patreon, and I mix them. My Patreon page. This is something that's kind of I've had for a while, but I haven't really been updating until recently, and I'm starting to use more actively, and I'm updating all of my content onto. So it'll be kind of a repository for all of the content that I create. So if you want to access it in one place and you want to support the podcast, this is for now the place to do it. I used to have kind of a tip jar and stuff on my Linktree page. For some reason that stopped working after a period of time. So now it's just more of a link page where you can get to all of these sites. But for now, check me out on patreon.com/theunfoundedpod. You can follow me there. You can support me there. And there will be more content uploaded every day as I get more of it transferred over from the other platforms and consolidated. So I think that's all I have besides that. I will mention here real quick, because this is something I'm going to be doing soon, but I haven't done as much recently. I do a little bit of video game streaming, but I haven't done it a lot. I'm going to do it more because I like to play video games to decompress. It's fun. I have certain ones that I really enjoy. And I figure while I'm doing that, I have this whole setup. Why not turn on the camera and at least let it go and have some streams like that too, and see what conversations come of it and just have some fun. So if you want to hang out with me in a little less serious format, because it's something that I'm really working on too, is taking myself less seriously and laughing a little bit more and enjoying that part of my personality that I've forgotten. Hang out with me on Twitch. Check me out on there. I think I'll also have some of those game live streams posted over on YouTube on the Chris the Sage account as well. So follow me on all the platforms, guys. If it's confusing for you what all of these platforms are, where to find them all, just check me out on the Spotify page. It should have them all there in one place to find, or on Linktree. You can find them there as well. All right. I think that's all the announcements I got for today. With that, that's the Unfounded Podcast. Oh, wait, whoops. Got a little bit ahead of myself there. Pressed the wrong button. That's all I have for today. I want to send you guys a lot of love, a happy new year, and I will be back on here next week and maybe even before that. We'll see. Bye-bye.